Tariff.
Tariff.
Tariffs.
And tariff.
Tariffs.
Donald Trump says the word tariffs is his favourite word. He went big on them in his first term and is going even bigger.
The USMCA is the fairest, most balanced, and beneficial trade agreement we have ever signed into law. It's the best agreement we've ever made.
Is the recent new Trump tariff policy a smart move for the US? It may or may not be, but one thing is definite. Canada has gone furious.
In Canada, we find that they're charging us over 200% for dairy products. You know about that. 250% for dairy products. Tariff.
The tension between the two powerful countries in North America is swiftly rising. In an unexpected turn of events, Canada is blocking its doors on US exports. Will the US call a truce now? The tariff strategy. First, let's talk about tariffs. Tariffs are taxes imposed on imported goods from other nations. The businesses that import these products are responsible for paying the tax to the government. Usually, tariffs are calculated as a percentage of the product's value. For example, a 20% tariff on Chinese goods would add an extra $2 to a $10 product. Companies may choose to pass some or all of this cost on to consumers. Historically, the US has imposed lower tariffs on imports compared to other countries. However, economists worry that Trump's new tariffs, along with additional ones he has proposed starting on April 2nd, could significantly raise prices for consumers in the US and worldwide.
China and Canada are reacting to President-elect Trump's promise to impose tariffs on those countries. The president-elect is calling for a 25% tariff on goods from Canada and Mexico.
Tariffs are a key component of Trump's broader economic strategy. According to him, tariffs will strengthen US manufacturing, safeguard jobs, increase tax revenue, and stimulate the domestic economy. He also aims to correct the trade imbalance between the US and its international partners by narrowing the gap between imports and exports. Despite this, Trump has not dismissed the possibility of a recession caused by his trade policies, which led to a sharp decline in US stocks before the metal tariffs were implemented. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick later defended the tariffs, stating they were worth it even if they resulted in economic downturns. Initially, Trump's tariffs focused on imports from China, Mexico, and Canada, which together accounted for over 40% of US imports in 2024.
US President Trump has announced he's imposing tariffs on the US' three largest trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China.
However, Trump has accused these countries of failing to curb the influx of migrants and illegal drugs like fentanyl into the US, claims that all three nations have denied. Today, we'll focus on the tensions between the US and Canada. Rising trade tensions between the US and Canada have led to a series of retaliatory measures, disrupting both economies. The conflict began when the US, under President Donald Trump, imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian aluminum and steel imports.
The USMCA is the fairest, most balanced, and beneficial trade agreement we have ever signed into law. It's the best agreement we've ever made.
Trump also calling for an additional 10% tariff on products coming from China,
citing the need to protect American industries. However, many viewed this as an aggressive economic attack on a close ally. In response, Ontario Premier Doug Ford swiftly introduced a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to key US states like Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. This move had an immediate impact, as these states heavily rely on Canadian electricity, leading to rising energy costs and a projected increase of $100 per month in household power bills. The US reacted swiftly, accusing Canada of leveraging essential resources in a growing trade war. In retaliation, Trump doubled the tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%, rattling financial markets. The Dow Jones plummeted nearly 600 points before recovering slightly, following a 900-point drop the day before. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq also declined, as concerns grew over potential disruptions in key industries, including automotive and consumer electronics. Investors worried that prolonged tensions could lead to an economic downturn, possibly even triggering a recession. Meanwhile, almost everyone is looking forward to this craze to stop. Will the rest of the world witness a temporary truce? A political maneuver. Amid the growing crisis, political leaders sought a resolution. Despite initially taking a tough stance, Premier Ford recognized the economic risks and engaged in high-level discussions with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. As a strategic move to ease tensions, Ford temporarily suspended the electricity surcharge, emphasizing that it could be reinstated if the U.S. failed to act in good faith. In response, Trump rolled back his planned tariff increase, keeping steel and aluminum duties at 25% instead of 50%.
Costly tariffs against your closest friends and allies do not make sense.
While the situation remained uncertain, the Ontario government defended its actions, arguing that Canada had demonstrated its ability to retaliate against aggressive US policies. A statement from Ford's office reaffirmed Ontario's commitment to protecting its economy and pushing back against unfair trade disputes. However, despite the temporary truce, financial markets remained volatile. Businesses faced ongoing uncertainty, and both governments were under pressure to secure a long-term trade resolution. The dispute underscored the deep economic interdependence between Canada and the US, which share a massive $773 billion trading relationship as of 2024.
Another American president understood the unmistakable value of free trade between allies.
Even minor disruptions have significant economic consequences, affecting industries reliant on cross-border trade. Tariffs drove up aluminum prices, impacting sectors such as automotive, appliances, and consumer goods. Companies struggled with rising costs, forcing many to pass expenses onto consumers. Frustration grew among U.S. state officials, particularly in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York, where governors urged Washington to de-escalate the dispute. Michigan's governor criticized the tariffs, arguing they harmed working-class Americans and urging the federal government to prioritize economic stability over political maneuvering. The auto industry, which depends on Canadian steel and aluminum, faced increased production costs, potential layoffs, and higher car prices. Other sectors, including construction, consumer electronics, and agriculture, also felt the impact as Canadian imports became more expensive. Small businesses, in particular, struggled with shrinking profit margins, supply chain disruptions, and rising expenses. Some sought alternative suppliers, while others were forced to cut costs elsewhere. Trade experts warned that prolonged tensions could push some businesses to the brink of closure. With both economies at risk, all eyes turned to the next round of negotiations. Would the US and Canada reach a compromise, or was this just the start of an even larger economic standoff? Uncertainty loomed as both Canada and the United States prepared for the next phase of their escalating trade conflict. What began as economic retaliation had transformed into a surge of national pride across Canada. As tariffs and countermeasures continued to disrupt commerce, Canadian leaders and citizens alike responded in ways that extended beyond government policy. The dispute was no longer just about aluminum, steel, or electricity. It had become a matter of national identity. The counteract. Well, for over a century, the US-Canadian border has been one of, if not the, most peaceful borders in the entire world. But in direct response to US tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum,
of course, primarily the trade war that they have chosen to unjustly launch on Canada,
the Canadian government swiftly enacted its own countermeasures. Canada imposed a 25% tariff on nearly $30 billion worth of American imports, covering a broad range of goods, from metals to consumer products such as sports equipment, computers, and cast iron items. This move sent a clear message. Canada would not passively accept what it saw as unjust trade policies. Beyond federal actions, Canadian provinces took independent steps to counter US economic aggression. Ontario played a key role, with Premier Doug Ford maintaining a strong stance, even after temporarily suspending the province's electricity surcharge. He warned that trade restrictions could be reinstated if the US continued its economic offensives, while also urging businesses to explore alternative markets and supply chains to lessen dependence on American goods. Quebec followed with its own retaliatory measures. Premier François Legault directed a review of government procurement contracts, prioritizing Canadian or non-US partners over American suppliers. In a symbolic yet impactful move, the province's liquor board banned the sale of American alcoholic beverages, echoing Ontario's earlier decision. This was part of a broader effort to demonstrate that American businesses, too, would feel the consequences of US trade policies. Across Canada, citizens took matters into their own hands. Social media campaigns with hashtags like #BuyCanadian and #SupportLocal encouraged consumers to shift their spending toward domestic brands. British Columbia, meanwhile, pursued a different tactic. Premier David Eby called on the federal government to impose a levy on US thermal coal exported through British Columbia's ports, an action aimed at both countering US tariffs and reinforcing Canada's environmental priorities. Environmental advocacy groups quickly supported the measure, seeing it as a way to reduce pollution while strengthening Canada's negotiating position. Initially cautious, Alberta later adopted a more strategic approach. Premier Danielle Smith endorsed selective tariffs on American goods that could be sourced from Canada or alternative international suppliers.
Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, there are some areas that are tariffed, but it's about a 96% tariff-free relationship.
Instead of immediate retaliatory actions, Alberta focused on long-term efforts to diversify supply chains and lessen reliance on US imports. Other provinces took more direct action. Nova Scotia doubled toll rates for US vehicles passing through its highways and stopped selling American liquor in provincial stores, joining Ontario and Quebec in that effort. Manitoba and Prince Edward Island took an even stronger stance, completely banning the import of US alcohol. Their premiers, Wab Kinew and Dennis King, defended these measures as necessary to safeguard Canada's economic independence. The Yukon government followed suit, suspending American alcohol imports and reviewing government contracts with US suppliers. The territory even considered imposing tolls on US vehicles entering its borders, though that proposal remained under discussion. While provinces acted decisively, the federal government continued negotiations behind the scenes. Prime Minister-designate Mark Carney signaled a willingness to engage in talks with President Trump, but firmly stated that any agreement must respect Canada's sovereignty. "I am prepared to meet with President Trump," Carney declared, "provided that our national sovereignty is fully respected and we work toward mutually beneficial trade solutions." His words reflected Canada's growing resolve to stand firm against US pressure. "You think that we've heard the worst, but Trump continues to shock the world. Did he just say Canada should be part of the US? Canada, a potential US state." Tensions escalated further when Trump made an unprecedented remark, suggesting that the only thing that makes sense was for Canada to become the 51st US state. This statement triggered immediate backlash across Canada. Outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau dismissed the idea outright, declaring, "There isn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada would become part of the United States." Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre echoed this sentiment, vowing, "Canada will never be the 51st state. We will remain a strong, independent, sovereign nation."
Arms locked together against common enemies. We will continue to build that friendship with the people of the United States.
Public opinion was overwhelmingly against the notion, with polls showing that 90% of Canadians opposed joining the US. The controversy only strengthened Canadian nationalism, with citizens proudly displaying their national flag, supporting domestic businesses, and reaffirming their cultural identity. Despite the intensifying conflict, some experts urged diplomacy over continued escalation. Economists warned that prolonged retaliation could harm both economies, causing job losses and economic instability. Business leaders on both sides of the border called for a resolution, emphasizing that free trade had historically benefited both nations. The trade war had already sent shockwaves through financial markets, political circles, and public opinion, but its most profound impact was on key industries. The automotive sector, a cornerstone of North American manufacturing, was hit especially hard. The US relies heavily on Canadian steel and aluminum for vehicle production, and tariffs had significantly increased costs. The Ford F-150, one of North America's best-selling trucks, was particularly affected due to its aluminum-intensive design. Analysts estimated that the tariffs added approximately $400 to the production cost of each vehicle, forcing manufacturers to either pass the cost on to consumers or cut expenses elsewhere. Other automakers, including General Motors, Stellantis, and Tesla, also felt the strain. Rising raw material costs threatened to make US-built vehicles more expensive and less competitive globally. Meanwhile, Canadian auto parts suppliers, particularly those in Ontario's manufacturing corridor, faced uncertainty. Some companies began diversifying their markets, seeking partnerships with European and Asian automakers to reduce reliance on US manufacturers. This shift could have long-term consequences for American car companies, as Canada had long been one of their most stable and trusted suppliers. Beyond automobiles, consumer goods industries also suffered. Electronics and household appliances, which frequently involve cross-border trade, faced higher import duties. Computers, a major component of US-Canada trade, became more expensive to import, driving up costs for retailers and, ultimately, consumers. Some industries tried to absorb the added expenses, but many had no choice but to pass them on, leading to higher prices on everyday goods. With no clear resolution in sight, the question remained: would Canada and the US find a way to settle their trade disputes, or was this just the beginning of an even larger economic confrontation? As trade tensions between Canada and the United States intensified, uncertainty grew, with both nations preparing for the next stage of their economic standoff. The conflict has not only led to retaliatory tariffs, but has also fueled a surge of nationalism across Canada. As tariffs and countermeasures disrupt trade, Canadian leaders and citizens are responding in ways that extend beyond government actions. The dispute has evolved beyond steel, aluminum, and electricity into a matter of national pride. Environmental groups, such as Dogwood BC, backed the proposal, citing concerns over pollution and climate change. The proposed tax would also serve as an economic tool, striking at a vital American industry. In 2023, the Port of Vancouver handled approximately 17.6 million metric tons of thermal coal, with nearly 11.7 million metric tons originating from the United States, mainly from Montana and Wyoming. If Canada restricted these exports, US coal producers would face logistical and financial challenges due to the lack of alternative West Coast export hubs, potentially leading to mine closures and job losses. The energy sector has also been affected, with the Canadian government's proposed tax on American thermal coal exports serving as both an environmental policy and an economic countermeasure. This move could significantly disrupt the US coal industry, which relies on Canadian ports to access Asian markets. Agriculture has not been spared either. Farmers in both countries have faced disrupted trade flows, fluctuating prices, and market uncertainty. Canada, a major buyer of US agricultural products, has imposed retaliatory tariffs that have already cost American farmers billions. Meanwhile, Canadian beef and grain exporters have encountered higher costs and new trade barriers when selling to American markets. These disruptions have affected supply chains, causing price increases and product shortages on both sides of the border. Financial markets have remained volatile as investors worry that a prolonged trade war could slow economic growth, weaken consumer confidence, and result in job losses. Analysts warn that the US-Canada trade relationship, one of the largest in the world, could face long-term damage if the conflict continues. As both governments weigh their next moves, businesses, workers, and consumers remain in limbo. The trade dispute has already reshaped industries, altered supply chains, and heightened economic anxieties. The question remains: should Canada continue pushing back, or is it time for both sides to find common ground? Let's get back to when things were before this recent tariff war. Canada's game before Trump's tariffs. Canada's tariff regulations are primarily governed by the Customs Tariff Act, which establishes a general tariff rate of 35% on goods entering the country. While this figure may seem high, it is rarely applied due to Canada's participation in international trade agreements, particularly as a member of the World Trade Organization, WTO. Through the WTO, more than 160 member countries, including Canada, benefit from Most Favored Nation (MFN) status, which allows for significantly lower tariffs on traded goods. All of Canada's major trading partners are WTO members, and as a result, benefit from reduced MFN tariffs.
This morning, the Trump administration's tariffs against 3 of our largest trading partners took effect,
which vary by product. These rates can be further lowered if Canada has a separate bilateral or multilateral trade agreement with a specific country. According to international trade lawyer Martha Harrison, these agreements enable Canada to reduce tariffs below MFN rates, or even eliminate them entirely. For example, while the MFN tariff for certain railroad axles is 9.5%, Australia and New Zealand only pay 2% due to specific trade agreements. One of the most significant trade agreements affecting Canadian tariffs is the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, USMR.
For a moment, let's focus on the trade that occurs between the United States, Mexico, and Canada.
Under CUSMA, 98% of goods imported from the United States enter Canada tariff-free. At least, this was the case before recent trade tensions. However, despite the broad application of MFN and CUSMA benefits, Canada still imposes higher tariffs on select products. Clothing, for instance, faces an average MFN rate of 18%, a measure designed to protect domestic manufacturers and discourage imports produced under poor labor conditions. What about dairy? Tariffs become more complicated in Canada's dairy industry, which operates under a supply management system. This approach regulates prices, ensures food safety, and shields dairy, egg, and poultry producers from foreign competition. However, these policies have been a long-standing source of contention with major trade partners, particularly the United States and New Zealand. Under this system, importers are allocated a quota for specific products, such as butter, cheese, and eggs, that they can bring into Canada tariff-free. However, if imports exceed these pre-established limits, extremely high tariffs apply. Former US President Donald Trump criticized this system, claiming that Canada imposes tariffs exceeding 200% on American dairy products. In reality, these tariffs only take effect once the US surpasses its quota, a threshold negotiated in 2018 as part of CUSMA. Importantly, the US has never reached this quota, as confirmed by the American dairy industry in 2023. During CUSMA negotiations, Canada agreed to gradually expand the amount of US dairy products that could enter its market without tariffs. Despite this concession, New Zealand challenged Canada's dairy policies in 2022, arguing that the country was failing to meet its obligations under the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. This dispute remains unresolved. Tariffs in global trade conflicts. Beyond North American trade, Canada has engaged in broader tariff disputes, particularly with China. In October 2023, Canada imposed a 25% surtax on Chinese steel and aluminum products and a 100% surtax on Chinese-made electric vehicles, citing concerns over unfair competition. Surtaxes function as additional tariffs layered on top of existing rates. China retaliated with tariffs targeting Canadian agricultural exports, including canola oil and peas. This escalation mirrored the earlier US decision to raise tariffs on Chinese imports, particularly on steel and aluminum, illustrating the extent to which Canada's trade policies align with those of the United States. According to Harrison, Canada often follows the lead of its key trading partners, particularly the United States, when shaping trade policy. This approach has historically benefited the North American economy. However, recent shifts in US trade priorities, including a less predictable approach to international trade agreements, pose challenges to Canada's long-standing economic strategy under CUSMA. The ongoing uncertainties surrounding Canada's dairy policies, trade relations with China, and alignment with the United States underscore the complexity of modern trade dynamics. As global trade patterns continue to evolve, Canada faces the challenge of balancing domestic economic protectionism with the benefits of international trade cooperation. Do tariffs create wars and global chaos? Throughout history, economic policies have played a crucial role in shaping international relations, sometimes even acting as a catalyst for conflicts. One of the most debated economic tools is the tariff, a tax imposed on imported goods. While tariffs are often used to protect domestic industries, they can also have far-reaching consequences that extend beyond economics, leading to heightened tensions, trade wars, and, in extreme cases, actual wars. To understand how tariffs contribute to global turmoil, it is important to examine their economic impact. At their core, tariffs are designed to protect local businesses by making imported goods more expensive, thus encouraging consumers to buy domestically produced products. While this seems beneficial at a national level, it often provokes retaliation from trading partners. Countries affected by tariffs may respond with their own counter-tariffs, leading to an escalating trade war. This tit-for-tat strategy can disrupt global supply chains, increase costs for businesses and consumers, and stifle economic growth worldwide. The Great Depression of the 30s is a prime example, where the US government enacted the Smoot-Hawley tariff, prompting other nations to impose their own trade barriers. The result was a devastating decline in global trade, worsening the economic downturn and contributing to international instability. Beyond economic damage, tariffs can also strain diplomatic relations, increasing hostilities between nations. When countries rely on one another for trade, they have a shared interest in maintaining peace and cooperation. However, when tariffs are weaponized as a tool of economic warfare, they create resentment and deepen political divisions. Modern examples include the US-Canada trade war, where both nations imposed steep tariffs on each other's goods. While these measures were intended to protect domestic interests, they also led to geopolitical tensions, economic uncertainty, and reduced global market confidence. Such economic conflicts can spill over into other areas, such as military alliances and regional stability, making the world a more volatile place. Historically, tariffs have played a role in triggering real wars. One of the most notable cases is the lead-up to World War II. Economic protectionism in the 30s not only deepened the economic crisis, but also exacerbated nationalistic sentiments. Countries turned inward, seeking self-sufficiency, and trade disputes fueled international resentment. Japan, for instance, faced economic sanctions and trade restrictions from Western nations, which contributed to its decision to expand militarily in search of resources, ultimately leading to the attack on Pearl Harbor and full-scale war. Even in contemporary times, tariffs have the potential to escalate into conflicts, particularly when they are used alongside other aggressive economic policies, such as sanctions and embargoes. In a world where nations are interconnected through trade, imposing heavy tariffs can be seen as an act of hostility. If economic pressures push a country into financial desperation, it may resort to military action to secure resources or assert dominance. Moreover, economic instability caused by tariffs can lead to domestic unrest, where struggling populations demand stronger government action, sometimes resulting in authoritarian policies or aggressive foreign strategies. It is important to recognize that while tariffs alone may not directly cause wars, they contribute to the conditions that make conflicts more likely. By disrupting economies, damaging international relationships, and fostering resentment, tariffs set the stage for broader geopolitical struggles. The lesson from history is clear. While protectionist policies might seem like a short-term solution to economic challenges, their long-term consequences can be dire. Instead of relying on tariffs, nations should focus on cooperative economic policies that promote fair trade, stability, and mutual growth. Tariff impact on industries and businesses. While tariffs can serve as a buffer against unfair competition, they also come with a range of consequences that ripple across industries and businesses, ultimately affecting consumers. Understanding these effects is crucial in evaluating the broader implications of trade policies. One of the most immediate impacts of tariffs is the increase in production costs for businesses that rely on imported raw materials or components. When tariffs are imposed on essential imports, such as steel, aluminum, or semiconductor chips, manufacturers must either absorb the added costs or pass them on to consumers. This puts industries like automotive, construction, and electronics at a disadvantage, as higher costs can lead to reduced competitiveness in both domestic and international markets. For small and medium-sized businesses, SMBs, the burden of tariffs can be particularly challenging. Unlike larger corporations that may have the financial resilience to withstand additional costs, SMBs often operate on thinner margins and lack the flexibility to adjust their supply chains quickly. This can result in layoffs, reduced expansion plans, and even business closures in extreme cases. The additional financial strain can also discourage entrepreneurship, stifling innovation and economic growth. Beyond direct costs, tariffs can trigger retaliatory measures from trading partners, further complicating the business landscape. Countries targeted by tariffs often respond with their own tariffs on exported goods, creating a back-and-forth trade war. For example, when the US imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, China responded with levies on American agricultural products, hurting farmers who depend on exports. This cycle of retaliation creates uncertainty in global trade, making it harder for businesses to plan long-term investments. Supply chain disruptions are another significant consequence of tariffs. Many industries operate on a global scale, sourcing parts and materials from multiple countries to optimize costs and efficiency. Tariffs disrupt these established supply chains by making certain imports prohibitively expensive, forcing companies to either absorb losses or invest in alternative suppliers. This restructuring takes time and resources, often leading to delays, inefficiencies, and increased operational costs.
His shipment might not arrive before new tariffs start.
On the other hand, some domestic industries benefit from tariffs. By making foreign products more expensive, tariffs can encourage consumers and businesses to buy locally produced goods. This can provide a boost to domestic manufacturers and create jobs in the short term. However, in the long run, protectionist policies can lead to complacency, reducing the incentive for domestic businesses to innovate and improve efficiency. Without competition, industries may stagnate, leading to higher prices and lower quality products for consumers. Consumer impact is another critical factor to consider. When businesses pass on the costs of tariffs to consumers, everyday products, from electronics to groceries, become more expensive. This can contribute to inflation, reducing purchasing power, and affecting overall economic growth. For households already struggling with financial challenges, higher prices can force difficult spending decisions, ultimately weakening consumer confidence and slowing economic activity. Despite the challenges tariffs create, businesses often find ways to adapt. Some companies shift production to countries not subject to tariffs, while others invest in automation and efficiency improvements to offset rising costs. Trade negotiations and policy adjustments also play a crucial role in shaping long-term outcomes. Governments must weigh the benefits of protecting domestic industries against the broader economic repercussions, seeking a balance that promotes sustainable growth. While tariffs can serve as a strategic tool for economic policy, their impact on industries and businesses is complex and multifaceted. While some domestic industries may benefit, many others face higher costs, reduced competitiveness, and supply chain disruptions. The uncertainty created by tariff policies can stifle investment and economic growth, making it essential for policymakers to consider both the short-term and long-term effects. Ultimately, a well-balanced approach that encourages fair trade while minimizing negative repercussions is key to fostering a stable and thriving economy. So, what's next for the US and Canada? Looking forward, the reintroduction of such tariffs has significant economic ramifications. Industries on both sides of the border are grappling with increased costs, supply chain disruptions, and market uncertainties. For instance, the American bourbon industry, which had been experiencing a renaissance, now faces challenges as Canada removes American bourbons from their shelves in response to US economic threats. Moreover, the Federal Reserve has expressed concerns over these trade tensions, holding US interest rates steady and cutting growth forecasts. The new GDP growth projection for 2025 has been reduced to 1.7% from 2.1%, with consumer price inflation anticipated to rise to 2.7%. Beyond the economic sphere, these tariffs have social and political consequences. The increased costs of imported goods disproportionately affect lower-income households, exacerbating economic inequalities. Critics argue that while the tariffs aim to protect domestic industries, they inadvertently burden consumers and strain international alliances. Navigating this complex landscape requires diplomatic finesse and strategic economic planning. Both nations must weigh the benefits of protectionist policies against the broader implications for their economies and citizens. Engaging in constructive dialogue, exploring alternative trade agreements, and seeking multilateral solutions through organizations like the World Trade Organization could pave the way for de-escalation. The new tariff policies have reignited debates on trade protectionism, economic nationalism, and international cooperation. As Canada and the US stand at this crossroads, their decisions will not only shape their bilateral relationship, but also influence the global economic order in the years to come. Thanks for watching the video. Like and subscribe for more content like this.